Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're not diving into a grand, epic war or a tragic, star-crossed romance. No, tonight we're going to settle into a much quieter, much more niche mystery from the ancient world. The kind of question that probably kept a few oracles up at night. Why was Poseidon, the god of the seas, the earth shaker, the lord of horses, a being of immense, primordial power, so spectacularly, legendarily bad at cooking? I mean, the man could summon tsunamis with a flick of his wrist, but ask him to poach a sea base? Disaster. Catastrophe. An affront to the senses that would make a mortal chef weep into their apron. Imagine it for a second. You're not in your cozy bed. You're standing on a sun-bleached pier in ancient Pylos. The air is thick with the smell of salt, dried fish, and cedar pitch from ships. You can feel the rough, splintery wood under your bare feet. The Mediterranean sun is a physical weight on your shoulders, and you're pretty sure your modern sunscreen is 1,000 years for being invented. You'd have to slather yourself in olive oil and some dubious clay mixture that probably has crushed up scorpion in it. You wouldn't last a day. The simplicity of life was brutal. No takeout, no instant noodles, no popping a frozen pizza in the oven. If you wanted a meal, you either had to be very skilled, very rich, or on very good terms with a deity who knew their way around a kitchen. Poseidon was decidedly not that deity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment below. Let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the little map of our sleepless or soon-to-be sleepy community. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We'll start not with a bang, but with the gentle, lapping sound of waves against the shore, the very domain of our culinary challenge god. You have to understand, the ancient Greek world was a sensory overload of a different kind. It wasn't the constant digital ping of notifications. It was the groan of ship timbers, the cry of gulls, the distant chant of sailors hauling nets. And presiding over all of it was Poseidon. He wasn't just a god you prayed to for safe passage. His mood was the weather. A calm meant a calm god. Perhaps one distracted by a beautiful nymph or a promising new stallion. A stormy sea? Well, someone probably forgot a sacrifice, or worse, served him a poorly seasoned stew. The common historical thread is Poseidon's immense power and his volatile temper. Homer calls him the earth shaker, and his trident wasn't just for show. It could split continents. But there's a lesser-known fact, a little footnote in the margins of Hesiod's Theogony that hints at our theme. While his brothers Zeus and Hades drew lots for the sky and the underworld, Poseidon got the sea. But the stories whisper that he was also given dominion over all liquids. Not just water, but broths, soups, stews, the culinary domain of the pot and the kettle. It was a portfolio addition he seems to have resented, or perhaps just profoundly misunderstood. Scholars still debate whether this was a genuine divine mandate or just an ancient attempt to explain why the god of such a vital, life-giving element couldn't manage to boil an egg without causing a maritime incident. His palace, Igi, was said to be a marvel, built from coral and mother of pearl, lit by the gentle glow of bioluminescent jellyfish, stocked with treasures from sunken ships. It had stables for his magical horses, halls for feasting, gardens of swaying kelp. But if you wandered its halls, you'd notice something odd. The hearth, the sacred center of any Greek home, divine or mortal, was often cold. Or, when it was lit, it was attended by nervous nereids who would shoo their lord away with polite but firm whispers about leaving it to the professionals. The kitchen, if one could call it that, showed signs of bizarre, catastrophic experiments. scorch marks that couldn't be explained by any normal flame, strange, glutinous residues on otherwise beautiful abalone shell plates. The palace dolphins gave that wing a wide berth. His main passion, besides causing earthquakes, was horses. He was said to have created the first horse by striking a cliff with his trident. It's a powerful, creative act, but think about the metaphor. He didn't nurture the horse into being. He didn't feed it or raise it. He struck the earth and commanded a perfect creature to emerge. That was his approach to creation, immediate, dramatic, and born from sheer force of will. Cooking doesn't work like that. You can't try and strike a bunch of ingredients into a delicious moussaka. It requires patience, subtlety, a feel for process. Qualities Poseidon, in his divine impatience, possessed in vanishingly small quantities. He wanted results as instant as the birth of a steed from stone. Simmering a sauce for hours? That was a form of torture. So we have our setting, a powerful, impatient god, lord of a domain filled with culinary potential, in a world where sharing a meal was a fundamental act of civilization. And yet he stood apart from it, a disastrous force of nature in the one room in the house that requires a gentle touch. This disconnect, this hilarious flaw in an otherwise terrifyingly competent figure, is where our story truly begins. It all came to a head, as these things often do, at a party. Not just any party, but a feast on Mount Olympus, where the stakes for a bad dish were eternally high. But that is for the next time we drift together. For now, just listen to the rhythm of your own breathing, slow and steady, like waves retreating from shore. So, Poseidon, where do we even begin with him? Put aside the images of a wise, bearded elder. Think less serene ocean grandfather and more chaotic maritime CEO with severe anger management issues and a passion for horsepower. His moods were the original stock market of the ancient world, volatile, unpredictable, and capable of wiping you out in an instant. When he was pleased, the seas were calm, the trade winds blew, and ports thrived. When he was slighted, hurricanes, ships swallowing whirlpools, coastlines rearranged like furniture in a toddler's tantrum. His power was absolute, physical, and terrifyingly direct. Now, you'd think with all that dominion over the liquid realm, he'd have a natural affinity for the kitchen. Broths, sauces, reductions, it's all about manipulating liquids, right? But here's the thing about Poseidon. His relationship with water was one of raw command, not finesse. He didn't coax, he commanded. You can't command a hollandaise to emulsify. You have to gently, patiently whisk it into being. This fundamental mismatch between his divine skill set and the alchemy of cooking was the root of all our problems. His famous trident, the symbol of his power, was the ultimate blunt instrument. It was great for stirring up ocean floors, less great for gently folding egg whites. His primary love was horses. The myth says he created the first horse, named Cepheus or the Stormborn, by striking a rock on a beach. Poof! Instant perfect equine. No gestation period, no awkward foal phase, no feeding or training. A finished product, born of dramatic geological violence. This tells you everything. Poseidon was a god of finished products, of monumental, awe-inspiring results. Cooking is the opposite. It's a journey. The transformation of a raw, bloody fish into a delicate, flaky meal is a slow, careful magic. It requires a tolerance for the in-between stages, for the messy, simmering, not quite there yet phases. Poseidon had the attention span of a goldfish, and not even a wise, old goldfish, but a distracted one seeing a new castle ornament. A lesser-known fact, tucked away in some regional cultic hymns, is that Poseidon was also worshipped as a god of freshwater springs. This makes sense. water is water. But these springs were often located near salt flats or had a faintly brackish taste. The local priests explained this as the earth shaker's seasoning, a literal divine touch. Historians and hydrologists still debate whether these tales explain actual mineral content in aquifers, or if it's just a post hoc justification for why the local water tasted a bit off. Like maybe someone had tried to boil pasta in it. Picture him in his element, not in a kitchen, but striding across the sea floor, his chariot pulled by monstrous hippocampi, half-horse, half-fish creatures that churned the water into foam. His beard was made of swirling kelp, his eyes the cold, shifting gray of a winter storm over the Aegean. He communicated in the language of pressure changes and whale song. He was majesty and terror incarnate. Now imagine this entity trying to mince garlic. The sheer cognitive dissonance is laughable. The garlic wouldn't be minced. It would be atomized by a focused blast of hydraulic pressure. The knife would dissolve into rust in his hand. His idea of low heat was a hydrothermal vent. This is why the other gods tread carefully. Zeus might throw lightning bolts in anger, but they were over quickly. A grudge from Poseidon was a lingering thing. He could send years of bad luck to a fisherman or direct a persistent, annoying current to always be against a merchant's sails. He was the master of the slow, nagging, debilitating problem, and this personality flaw translated perfectly to his culinary efforts. A failed dish from Apollo might be burnt and discarded. A failed dish from Poseidon would be persistent. It might follow you. It might reappear on your plate weeks later, having somehow fermented into something sentient and vaguely accusatory. He had all the resources. His palace's larders were stocked with the ocean's finest. Fat tuna, sweet prawns, mysterious abalone, tender octopus, rare pink pearls that could be ground into a luxurious powder. He had access to volcanic vents for grilling and deep, cold trenches for chilling. He had an army of servants, graceful nereids who knew every herb in the coral gardens, sturdy telchines, ancient seasmiths who could forge the finest cookware, and dolphins who could fetch ingredients with cheerful efficiency. He had everything except the one thing you can't trident your way into, restraint. So the stage was set for a culinary tragedy of divine proportions. All the characters were in place. The powerful, impatient god with everything to prove, a pantheon of peers who were, let's be honest, a bit judgy and bored with ambrosia, and a world of flawless ingredients waiting to be ruined. The incident that cemented his reputation didn't happen in some hidden kitchen, though. It happened in the most public forum imaginable, the dining hall of Mount Olympus, during a formal feast. The motive wasn't hunger, but pride. And the result wasn't just a bad meal. It was a mythological event that would be whispered about for eons, a warning to gods and mortals alike. Never, ever let Poseidon help at the potluck. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, just picture that vast, silent palace under the sea, lit by eerie, shifting light. In a cavernous room that should be warm with the smell of baking bread and roasting fish, there's only the cold, damp air and the distant, mournful song of a whale. A single, perfect lobster sits on a marble counter, waiting. It has no idea of the horrors that await it. And as you drift closer to sleep, you can almost hear the first, fateful clang of a celestial pot being handled with all the grace of an undersea earthquake. The feast was to celebrate something relatively minor, a successful mediation between two river nymphs, or the invention of a new lyre string. On Olympus, they'd celebrate anything to break the monotony of eternity. The great hall shimmered with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reflecting off gold plates and gem-encrusted goblets. The air smelled of ambrosia, roasting meats from the mortal world a delicacy, and the faint, floral perfume of the gods themselves. Laughter echoed, music played, and for a moment, the cosmos felt perfectly ordered. Poseidon sat there, massive and blue-skinned, his trident leaning against his throne like an umbrella a tourist forgot. He watched as Hebe, the cupbearer, poured nectar. He watched as Hestia, goddess of the hearth, oversaw the mortal servants carrying platters with a serene, matronly pride. He saw the appreciation on the faces of the other gods as they bit into perfect figs, savory lamb, honey-drenched pastries. A strange, unfamiliar feeling bubbled in his divine chest. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was more like a competitive itch. He was a creator god. He made horses. He shaped coastlines. Surely, he could contribute more to this banquet than just providing the salt for the bread. "Brother," he boomed, his voice like a wave crashing in a sea cave. The conversation died down. This fare is pleasant, but it lacks the bold essence of the deep, the true bounty of my realm. Zeus, picking a piece of gristle from his teeth, raised an eyebrow. Your realm provides fine salt, Poseidon, and the occasional pleasing tuna. We are grateful. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. That was the trigger. Poseidon's pride, a vast and sensitive continent, had been nudged. Salt? Tuna? You speak as a mortal market-goer. I shall show you. I shall prepare the piece de resistance. He mangled the French phrase, of course, but the intent was clear. He rose, his form seeming to fill the hall, droplets of seawater falling from his beard to sizzle on the marble floor. A hushed, anticipatory silence fell. It wasn't respectful. It was the silence of spectators watching someone walk toward a clearly marked cliff. Hera shot Zeus a look that screamed, "Do something." Dionysus quietly filled his goblet to the brim. Athena merely sighed and opened a scroll, pretending to read. Poseidon marched not to the Olympian kitchens, but to a balcony overlooking the mortal world. He thrust his trident into the thin, high-altitude air and drew it back as if spearing a fish. From the distant Aegean, far below, a silvery streak shot upward, arcing through the clouds and landing with a wet slap on the balcony floor. It was a magnificent, colossal sea base, still gasping, its scales reflecting the sun like 1,000 tiny mirrors. It was a creature of pure, oceanic perfection. "Behold," Poseidon declared, "the main course." He then made his first critical mistake. Instead of taking it to a kitchen, he decided to cook it then and there on the balcony with divine power. He reasoned that if his will could boil oceans, it could surely cook a fish. He held his hands over the creature, concentrating. The idea was a delicate, internal steam cooking. The reality was a catastrophic misapplication of thermodynamics. A visible beam of raw, saline heat erupted from his palms. It wasn't fire. It was like focusing the heart of a hydrothermal vent. The fish didn't cook. It underwent a series of horrifying transformations in rapid succession. First, it froze solid, flash-preserved in a salt ice shell. Then, the shell cracked, and the interior instantly vaporized, leaving a hollow, brittle carcass. Then, that carcass superheated, glowing red-hot, before finally collapsing into a pile of gray, smoking ash that smelled overwhelmingly of regret and low tide. The entire process took about 7 seconds. A gust of wind scattered the ash over the balcony. Some of it floated back into the hall, settling lightly on the ambrosia platters. The god stared. The music had stopped. Poseidon looked at the pile of ash, then at his hands, then at his brother. His expression cycled through confusion, indignation, and finally, towering wrath, but this time a wrath directed inward, which was infinitely more dangerous. The fire was impure, he roared, deflecting. The altitude affected the process. A little-known fact, recorded only in a fragmentary satire by a skeptical Athenian playwright, is that this incident directly led to the establishment of the first no-divine cooking zones on Olympus. A formal rule was quietly added to the celestial code. All food preparation must occur in designated hearth areas, under the supervision of Hestia or an approved mortal chef. Spontaneous combustion of ingredients is strictly prohibited. Historians still debate whether the smell that day, described variously as burnt Atlantis, despair, and fishy lightning, lingered in the Olympian drapes for decades, a permanent olfactory reminder of Poseidon's folly. Dionysus finally broke the silence. He took a long drink, coughed, and said, "Well, it's certainly reduced. It was the kindest thing anyone could manage. But the damage was done. Poseidon's reputation was sealed. He wasn't just a god who couldn't cook. He was a god whose cooking was an active cosmic hazard." He stomped back to his seat, the floor trembling with each step. He didn't speak for the rest of the feast. He just glowered at his golden plate, which remained empty save for a few flecks of his own ashen contribution. The other gods slowly resumed their chatter, but the mood had shifted. Every laugh felt a bit forced. Every glance in Poseidon's direction a bit too quick. He had wanted to awe them with the bounty of his domain. Instead, he had given them the one thing immortals rarely experienced: second-hand embarrassment of truly epic proportions. And in that moment of silent, smoldering humiliation, an idea was born in the Earthshaker's mind. If he couldn't master the cooking of sea creatures, perhaps he could create a new one so inherently perfect, so self-seasoned and easy to prepare, that even he couldn't ruin it. This misguided thought would lead him to his next great failure, one that would forever alter the biodiversity of the Mediterranean seabed. But for now, just feel the quiet after a loud noise, the settling of ash, the gentle return of mundane sounds like the distant clatter of dishes being cleared away far, far from the sea. Humiliated but never humbled, Poseidon retreated from Olympus not with a plan to learn, but with a plan to invent his way out of the problem. His logic, inasmuch as a force of nature has logic, was flawless. If existing sea life was too tricky, too prone to ashification or vaporization, he would design a new one. A creature so simple, so straightforward, so culinarily obvious that its preparation would be foolproof, even for a divine fool. He descended to the sea floor, to a quiet, sandy plain near his palace, a place he used for prototyping. The water was cold and still, the light a dim blue. He gathered the materials of his realm, not with a recipe, but with an engineer's sensibility. Sand for texture, a gelatinous mucus from a certain deep-sea jellyfish for binding, calcium carbonate for structure. For flavor, he reasoned, the creature should taste of the sea itself, a self-contained, pre-seasoned entree. He infused the mixture with concentrated essence of brine, kelp, and a hint of oceanic minerals. He shaped it with his hands, not with artistic care, but with the brisk efficiency of a mason laying brick. The result was a lump, a dull, gray-brown, vaguely cucumber-shaped lump about the size of a man's forearm. It lay inert on the sand. Poseidon frowned. It lacked grandeur. He tapped it with his trident. It jiggled slightly. He poked it harder. It contracted, ejecting a stream of viscous, silky threads from one end. Defensive mechanism, he declared, pleased. Practical. He decided to add a ring of stubby, tentacle-like feet around its mouth, because all respectable sea creatures had something like that. He named it Holoteuros, or Whole Thief, because he felt that it stolen his idea of simplicity and given him back This, of course, was the first sea cucumber. His plan was to immediately cook it to prove his concept. He summoned a controlled geothermal vent, a gentle one, and placed the creature near its warmth. The sea cucumber did not sizzle, sear, or transform into a delicious morsel. Instead, it began to melt, not dramatically, but sadly, like a candle left in the sun, its form slackening, its interior dissolving into a cloudy, unappetizing slurry that dispersed into the current. It was, if anything, even less edible in its cooked state. Enraged, Poseidon grabbed the remains. In a fit of pique, he hurled the gelatinous mass away. It sailed through the water, breaking apart, and its microscopic larvae settled in crevices across the ocean floor. Thanks to his divine touch, they thrived. Within a season, the previously pristine sands were crawling with these slow, digesting lumps. They were biologically a marvel, detritus eaters that cleaned the ocean floor. But to Poseidon, they were a living, crawling monument to his failure. He issued a decree, broadcast via whale song and the trembling of shrimp. These creatures were not to be eaten. They were his culinary concept, and they were off the menu for all eternity. He couldn't stand the thought of anyone succeeding where he had failed, or worse, confirming that his creation was as inedible as it appeared. This is the lesser-known, probable mythological origin for the widespread taboo against eating sea cucumbers in many ancient Mediterranean cultures. While some daring coastal communities eventually did eat them, they were often considered food of last resort, and the preparation was a secret, lengthy process involving repeated drying and smoking. Nothing Poseidon would have the patience for. Marine biologists still debate the incredible evolutionary success of the sea cucumber, a creature that seems to defy all logic for survival. Some whisper it's because they carry a divine curse of indigestibility. But the story of the sea cucumber had a ripple effect. The other sea creatures, having witnessed the creation and rejection of this new being, grew nervous. The octopuses hid in tighter crevices. The fish schooled in more complex patterns. A general sense of culinary anxiety permeated the ecosystem. Poseidon's subjects now feared not only his trident, but his culinary curiosity. To be deemed interesting by the Lord of the Seas was a potential death sentence that involved neither predation nor glory, just a sad, experimental demise near a thermal vent. Poseidon, however, was not one for introspection. He saw the problem not as his technique, but as his medium. Fire, or his version of it, was the issue. Water was his element. Fire was fickle, stolen from the gods by Prometheus, a tool of chaos. If he was to master cooking, he needed to master this opposing element. He needed to conquer fire itself, and he knew just the god to pester for lessons. Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods, a craftsman who bent flame to his will every day. Surely, he thought, the secret lay in proper tool use. It was a logical next step, born of utter desperation and a complete misunderstanding of the root cause. He would march, or rather, swim forcefully, to the volcanic forges of Lemnos, ready for an apprenticeship. He was about to learn that some elements, like some gods, are simply incompatible, and that his quest for culinary mastery was about to make the world's oceans significantly saltier. But for now, picture the deep, silent seafloor, the gentle, mindless grazing of the first sea cucumbers, the distant, angry rumble of a god moving off in search of a new mistake to make. And as you sink deeper into relaxation, feel the weightlessness, the slow drift, like a particle carried on a cold, dark current far from the light and the heat. The forges of Hephaestus were not a place of gentle warmth. They were a realm of brutal, creative heat. The air shimmered with it, thick with the smell of ozone, molten metal, and volcanic sulfur. Cyclopes and automatons moved in a rhythmic, spark-showering dance, hammering divine artifacts into being. At the center, hunched over an anvil that glowed like a captured star, was Hephaestus, his muscular arms slick with sweat, his focus absolute. Poseidon's arrival was like a cold tide washing into a furnace. Steam rose in great clouds where his damp form met the superheated air. He cleared his throat, a sound like boulders grinding in a surge. "Nephew, I require instruction." Hephaestus didn't look up. He was quenching a newly forged sword in a trough of mystical oil that hissed with the voices of damned souls. "Instruction in what, uncle? Submarine geology? Equine dentistry?" "In fire," Poseidon stated, as if ordering a storm. "The controlled application of flame. For culinary purposes." The rhythmic hammering in the forge stuttered for a beat. Several Cyclopes exchanged glances. Hephaestus finally set down his tongs and turned, wiping his brow with a soot-blackened forearm. He looked at the god of the seas, took in the earnest, stormy frustration in his eyes, and felt a rare pang of pity mixed with profound professional dread. Teaching Poseidon to control fire was like teaching a hurricane to knit. It was a category error of cosmic proportions. "Fire is not a wave, uncle," Hephaestus said, his voice a low rasp of grinding stone. "You cannot command it. You must collaborate with it. You must listen to it." Poseidon scoffed, a sound that made the oil in the quenching trough ripple. "I do not listen to elements. They obey." That was the core of it. And so began the most disastrous apprenticeship in divine history. Hephaestus, with infinite patience, started with the basics. He showed Poseidon how to light a simple, wood-fed forge fire. Poseidon concentrated, and a jet of super-pressurized salt water shot from his fingertip, extinguishing the kindling and leaving a pile of sodden, salty ash. "Too much zeal," Hephaestus muttered, relighting it. Next was temperature control. "See this color?" Hephaestus said, pointing to a metal rod glowing a cherry red. "This is for bending. This," he pointed to a white-hot segment, "is for welding. You must see the heat, feel in the air." Poseidon stared. He saw the colors, but his divine senses interpreted them through the lens of hydrothermics. The cherry red reminded him of a sluggish lava flow on the ocean floor. Useless. The white-hot reminded him of the instant before a deep-sea vent exploded. Chaotic. He reached out with his will, not to understand the fire, but to dominate the metal. The rod didn't just heat up, it vaporized in a puff of metallic gas that coated the ceiling in a fine, toxic zinc snow. Hephaestus closed his eyes for a long moment. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should focus on an application. A simple one, boiling." He led Poseidon to a smaller, ceramic kiln used for annealing glass. A simple copper pot of fresh water hung over it. The goal is to bring the water to a gentle roll. A simmer, not a fury. Think of it as persuading the sea to dance, not to rage. Poseidon nodded, a glint of understanding in his eyes. Persuading the sea to dance? He could do that. He focused on the pot, on the water within. But his concept of a gentle roll was calibrated to oceanic scales. He thought of tidal surges, of the powerful, rhythmic pull of the moon. He poured his will into the water. The water did not simmer. It reacted as if the entire pot had been dropped into the Mariana Trench and subjected to impossible pressure. It imploded. The copper pot crumpled inwards with a deafening shriek, and the water, instead of boiling, was compressed into a tiny, super-dense sphere of hypersaline fluid for a split second before it exploded outwards. The resulting blast was not of heat, but of pure, concentrated salt and steam. It shattered clay molds, overturned anvils, and left every surface in the forge coated in a thick, white, crystalline crust. The Cyclopes coughed and sputtered, licking salt from their lips with dismay. And here lies the lesser-known, apocryphal origin of why the sea is salty. The common myth involves a magic salt mill, a mortal folktale. But some obscure pre-Hellenic fragments suggest the oceans weren't always this saline. They posit that a series of divine experiments in fluid dynamics, specifically attempts to boil freshwater with oceanic will, irrevocably altered the salinity balance. Geologists and historians of myth still debate whether this story is a metaphorical explanation for the brine springs Poseidon was associated with, or a faint echo of a time when early humans noticed salinity increasing in certain basins. Hephaestus watched this salty devastation, his masterpiece sword now lightly corroded. He let out a long, weary sigh that sounded like a bellows deflating. "Uncle," he said, his pity now fully evaporated. "Fire is not your domain. Water is. You cannot make them marry with force. You are trying to mate a hammer with a whisper." Poseidon stood amidst the salty ruin, his beard dripping with brine, his pride once again a shattered vessel on the rocks. He had not conquered fire. He had weaponized water against it and created a new kind of mess. The lesson was clear, but he was incapable of learning it. The problem wasn't the fire. The problem was his touch, his essence, which turned every process into a cataclysm. He left the forge without another word, the steam of his passage mixing with the volcanic fumes. He was angrier now, but also confused, a dangerous state for a god. He needed a different approach. If the brute force of the elements failed him, perhaps he needed wisdom, strategy, the gentle, guiding touch of a goddess known for crafts and practical skill. His mind, seething and saline, turned toward Athens and toward the one deity who might see his quest as a solvable problem rather than a divine joke: Athena. It was a decision that would not lead to a better soup, but to the founding of a great city and a rivalry etched in stone and olive wood. But for now, feel the aftermath of that failed explosion. Not heat, but a pervasive, dry, salty taste in the air. The feeling of a wrongness that can't be washed away. The slow, silent settling of crystalline dust, covering everything in a gritty, regretful film, as the great forges of Hephaestus slowly, reluctantly, begin to clang and spark once more. Athens, in those early days, was not yet a city of marble and philosophy. It was a promising rock, a high, sun-baked acropolis overlooking a fertile plain and the sparkling Saronic Gulf. Two deities eyed it covetously: Poseidon, seeking a land-bound cult center to prove his versatility beyond the waves, and Athena, who saw a place for wisdom, law, and civilized arts to take root. The local king, Cecrops, declared a contest. Each god would give the people a gift. The better gift would win the patronage. Poseidon, still smarting from his forge fiasco, saw a chance to kill 2 seagulls with 1 trident strike. He would give something not just powerful, but useful. Something that would prove his mastery over not just wild oceans, but over the very essence of life-sustaining cuisine. He would provide the ultimate cooking medium. He strode to the Acropolis, his form causing the earth to tremble. The people watched in awe and terror. He raised his trident high and brought it down with a thunderous crack on the bare limestone. The rock split, not with a gush of fresh water, but with a roaring, surging geyser of salt water. It wasn't just a spring, It was a briny, bubbling fountain, flooding the area with a distinct smell of the deep sea. A few salted minnows flopped pathetically in the new pool before expiring. "Behold," he bellowed, "a spring that carries the very spice of the oceans. Never shall your food be bland again." The people stared at the salty pool, then at their now salinizing farmland, then at each other. It was impressive but utterly, catastrophically useless. You can't drink salt water. You can't irrigate with it. You could, in theory, use it for brining, but it was a solution to a problem they didn't really have. Then came Athena. She knelt silently, and with a gentle touch, she planted a seed in the hard earth. Before the eyes of the assembly, it sprouted, grew, and burgeoned into a magnificent silver-green olive tree. "This tree," she said, her voice clear and calm, "will give you wood for your fires and homes, oil for your lamps, your skin, and your food, fruit to nourish you. It is a gift of peace, of sustenance, and of civilization." The choice was obvious. Cecrops and his people chose Athena and the olive tree. The city had its patron. Poseidon, in a fury of humiliation, was about to flood the plain, but was checked by Zeus. He settled for a lesser cult site elsewhere, his resentment a permanent undercurrent in the city's history. But our story isn't about the founding of Athens. It's about what happened after the contest, in a moment of strained divine diplomacy. Athena, ever pragmatic and perhaps sensing a geopolitical opportunity, a pacified Poseidon was better for her new city, approached her seething uncle. She found him glaring at his useless saltwater spring, which the Athenians were already using as a place to dump broken pottery. "Uncle," she began, her gray eyes missing nothing, "your gift was potent, but potency is not the same as finesse. The olive oil from my tree, it is a medium of transformation. It coaxes flavor, it does not assault it. Perhaps that is the lesson." Poseidon, for once, was listening, not out of humility, but out of a desperate, grasping hope. Here was a goddess of crafts, of weaving, of strategy. She understood process. "You propose a lesson, niece?" "I propose a demonstration," Athena said. She had a simple, fired clay lamp filled with her golden oil, a piece of flatbread, and a clove of garlic. She did not use fire. She simply crushed the garlic, let it soak in the oil in the sun's warmth, and drizzled it over the bread. The aroma was earthy, pungent, and incredibly appetizing. It was food in its simplest, most elegant form. "See," she said, "the oil carries. It mellows. It unites. It is a diplomat, not a conqueror." A light, the wrong kind of light, dawned in Poseidon's eyes. He didn't see the philosophy. He saw technique, a shortcut. He didn't need fire if he had this magical, flavor-conducting liquid. He grabbed the lamp of oil. "The medium, it is the medium that has failed me. I have been using water, but oil is the key." He completely missed her point about subtlety. Athena sighed, realizing her error. "Uncle, the oil is not the secret. The restraint is." But he was already gone, streaking back toward the sea, the lamp of Athenian olive oil clutched in his hand like the Holy Grail. He would try to apply the principle of oil to the bounty of the sea. It would predictably end in disaster. He would attempt to Athenize an octopus by marinating it in the oil for approximately 3 seconds before subjecting it to a pressure cooker effect using the weight of the ocean, creating history's first deep-fried and instantly fossilized cephalopod. A lesser-known fact, preserved in the archives of the Athenian Prytanean, is that after this incident, the city-state quietly added a clause to its annual tribute to Poseidon during the Panathenaic festival. Alongside the traditional sacrifice of a bull, They would also pour a tiny amphora of their finest olive oil into the sea at Piraeus. It wasn't worship, it was a bribe, a plea. Here, take the oil. Just please, for the love of all that is holy, don't try to cook with it. Historians still debate whether Athens's famed preference for simple, oil-based cuisine, grilled fish, vegetables, and vinaigrette, was a cultural evolution or a conscious, centuries-long culinary strategy to avoid anything that might remotely inspire Poseidon to visit and help in the kitchen. For Poseidon, the lesson was twisted. He now believed the problem was one of ingredients, not method. He had the ultimate ingredients in his domain. He just needed test subjects, willing, or more likely, unwilling participants to taste his creations and validate his genius. His gaze turned from the divine to the mortal realm, to the heroes sailing his waters. He would invite them to dine. It would be the least welcome invitation in the history of seafaring. But for now, picture the first olive tree, its leaves whispering in the Attic breeze, a symbol of peaceful, civilized nourishment. A world away from the chaotic, salty, oil-slicked experiments about to commence in a submarine palace, where a god was preparing to become the most feared dinner host in all of myth. The mortal heroes of Greece were brave, cunning, and resilient. They faced monsters, descended into the underworld, and wrestled with fate itself. But there was one invitation they feared more than the wrath of Hera or the machinations of a sphinx, a summons to dine with Poseidon. It was never framed as a summons, of course. It arrived as a most honorable invitation to partake of the bounty of the deep, delivered by a somber-faced dolphin or etched onto a conch shell that washed up at a hero's feet. It was a cosmic subpoena to be a taste tester. The first on this unofficial list was the great Odysseus, that cunning king of Ithaca. His ship was becalmed in a glassy, unnatural stretch of sea when a staircase of mother-of-pearl erupted from the depths before him. A deep, resonant voice vibrated through the hull of his ship. Son of Laertes, your wit is celebrated. Cool me. Judge a new delicacy. Odysseus, the man who had outwitted Polyphemus, felt a chill colder than any siren's song. He knew this was a trap no sword could counter. He went, instructing his men that if he wasn't back by sunrise, they should assume the worst and tell Penelope he died heroically by food. He was led into the grand, damp hall of Ige. Poseidon, beaming with a hospitality that didn't reach his stormy eyes, gestured to a table. On it sat a single, magnificent scallop shell the size of a shield. Inside was a substance. It was iridescent, shifting in color from puce to a worrying shade of bioluminescent green. Tiny, unidentifiable tentacles seemed to wave slowly within its jelly-like matrix. It emitted no smell, which was somehow more terrifying than a stench. A pâté, Poseidon announced proudly. A fusion of 100 sea essences, emulsified with the power of the tide itself. A single bite contains the complexity of an entire ocean trench. Odysseus looked at the pâté. He looked at the eager, expectant face of the earth shaker. His survival instincts, sharper than any Trojan spear, kicked in. He did not reach for the spoon made of gnarled tusk. Lord Poseidon, he began, his voice a model of reverent regret. The sight of this masterpiece humbles me. Its splendor is such that I, a mere mortal fresh from the gritty world, feel my senses are too coarse, too unrefined to properly appreciate its subtleties at this moment. My palate is still haunted by the taste of hardtack and stale wine. To partake now would be an insult to your artistry. I must first cleanse my mortal tongue, perhaps with a year of fasting and meditation on the pure taste of rainwater. It was a masterpiece of deflection. He wasn't rejecting the food. He was elevating it to a spiritual plane beyond his current, grubby mortal capacity to enjoy. Poseidon, baffled by this tactical retreat, frowned. "You require preparation?" "The deepest preparation, my lord," Odysseus said, bowing low. "To do less would dishonor your creation." Grudgingly, Poseidon let him go, muttering about mortals and their fragile constitutions. Odysseus returned to his ship and ordered the crew to row as if the hounds of Hades were behind them, which, gastronomically speaking, they had been. The next victim was the mighty Heracles. His approach was less diplomatic. When presented with a steaming, whole giant crab that seemed to be glowing from within, Heracles, after his 12th labor, had little patience for nonsense. He took one look, grabbed the crab by a claw, and with a grunt, hurled it through the palace wall, where it exploded in a shower of steaming, radioactive-looking meat against the side of a passing whale. "I eat bulls, not bugs," he boomed and stomped out. Poseidon was too stunned by the sheer disrespect to even cause a storm. He was learning that heroes were frustratingly resistant to his culinary advancements. A lesser-known fact, found in marginal notes on a papyrus fragment listing heroic deeds not widely sung, is that Jason of the Argo developed a standard protocol for his crew. Upon spotting any unnatural seafood platter or receiving a gelatinous, unsolicited seafood gift, the order was full reverse oars immediately. It's speculated that the legendary clashing rocks weren't just a geographical hazard, but a metaphor for the desperate, panicked maneuvering of ships trying to escape Poseidon's dinner invitations. Historians still debate whether the archetypal hero's feast in epics, simple roasted meat, bread, and wine, was a direct cultural rejection of Poseidon's complex, aquatic cuisine, a reaffirmation of solid, fire-cooked, landlubber food. But Poseidon was not deterred by mortal reluctance. He saw it as a lack of vision. If the great heroes were too bound by tradition, he needed a more captive, loyal audience. His thoughts turned homeward to the one being in the cosmos who was contractually obligated to at least pretend to be interested in his pursuits: his wife, the serene Nereid Amphitrite. She had been skillfully avoiding the kitchen for eons. Now he decided it was time for a family meal. He would cook for his queen. It was a decision that would test the very bonds of their divine marriage and lead to the most creative act of evasion in the history of the Pantheon. But for now, imagine the quiet dread on a calm sea. The way a sailor might eye a suspiciously perfect lobster pot floating on the waves, untouched. The collective sigh of relief from every hero on the water when a storm, a normal storm, blew up. A storm was just a storm. It was the calm, followed by the arrival of a formally dressed squid with a menu that they truly feared. Feel that relief, the simple, uncomplicated danger of wind and wave, as you drift deeper into the dark, quiet waters of sleep. Amphitrite, Queen of the Sea, was the embodiment of oceanic grace. Where Poseidon was the quake and the surge, she was the deep, steady current, the vast and silent abyss that gave the tumult its scale. Her patience was not the patience of a saint, but the patience of geology. She had married the earth shaker for political stability among the sea gods, a merger of Nereid and Olympian power. She managed his court, soothed the minor sea deities, and generally ensured the kingdom didn't collapse every time her husband got into a mood about a misplaced island or a poorly timed sneeze from a giant. Her primary strategy for a harmonious marriage was simple: keep Poseidon occupied with his passions. Earthquakes, horse breeding, grudge-holding, and far, far away from domestic projects, especially culinary ones. She had a system. When Poseidon would get that glint in his eye, the one that meant, "I have had a revolutionary idea about bouillabaisse," Amphitrite would glide into the throne room, her sea foam gown swirling. "My lord," she would say, her voice the sound of waves receding over smooth pebbles. The Leviathan of the Eastern Trench is complaining again about the underwater realignment. It says the new hydrothermal vents are ruining the feng shui of its lair. It demands an audience with the Earthshaker himself. Or, beloved, the Seahorse Stables. There's talk of a rebellious cult. It refuses to be harnessed to the Dawn Chariot. It says it has artistic differences with the sun's trajectory. These were Poseidon's catnip, problems requiring direct, authoritative, and preferably violent intervention. He would puff out his chest, grab his trident, and charge off to settle disputes with tectonic force. The thought of emulsified sauce is forgotten for another century. But even the best systems fail. One day, after a particularly humiliating incident where the sea nymphs had pretended to love a deconstructed oyster foam he'd made, they later fed it to a blind, anosmic tube worm. Poseidon returned to the palace with a new, frightening resolve. He would not be distracted. He would cook a meal for his wife, a romantic, private dinner, a testament to his dedication. He announced it in the grand hall, leaving no room for diversionary tactics. Amphitrite's serene smile didn't flicker, but internally, alarm bells clanged like sunken ship buoys in a hurricane. She saw the determined set of his jaw. This was beyond a Leviathan's feng shui. "My dearest," she said, approaching him. "What a thoughtful notion. A private dinner. Just the two of us." She let a hint of melancholy shade her voice. "It reminds me of our early days when you would show me the wonders of the surface world. The moonlight on the open ocean, far from the noise of the court." Poseidon, surprisingly sentimental, was hooked. Yes, it will be like that." Then Amphitrite continued, laying a cool hand on his arm. "It must be perfect, not here in the stale halls, surrounded by the ghosts of failed experiments." She chose the word carefully. "We must go to the one place that is truly ours. The Silent Expanse." The Silent Expanse was a legendary, trackless plain of the deep Atlantic, where the water was perfectly clear, the pressure was immense, and nothing lived. It was the oceanic equivalent of a sensory deprivation tank. It was also, notably, several days' journey from the palace kitchens. Poseidon, mistaking her tactical retreat for romanticism, agreed. "A pilgrimage for cuisine. We shall journey. I shall gather the freshest ingredients along the way." And so Amphitrite engineered the great culinary delay. The journey was slow, meandering. She would point out a rare, bioluminescent squid that might make a stunning amuse-bouche. Poseidon would spend hours trying to catch it humanely, only to have it ink him and vanish into the abyss. She'd suggest a specific type of volcanic rock from a far ridge for the perfect searing stone. The detour took a day. All the while, she ensured their path avoided any region with usable geothermal heat or convenient fishing grounds. By the time they reached the stark, beautiful desolation of the Silent Expanse, Poseidon's enthusiasm was mingled with travel fatigue. He had a net full of frustrated, incompatible sea life and a bag of very cold rocks. "Here we are," Amphitrite sighed contentedly, floating in the vast, empty blue. "Perfect solitude. Now, my love, your masterpiece." Poseidon looked around. There was no hearth, no vent, no nothing, just crushing, silent pressure and absolute zero culinary infrastructure. For the first time, he faced the total impracticality of his dream in a setting that offered no distractions or tools. He fumbled, trying to will a cooking fire into existence in the watery void, succeeding only in creating a brief, sizzling sphere of superheated steam that scalded a passing jellyfish. He deflated. Amphitrite swam to him, taking his hands. "Sometimes," she whispered, The most nourishing thing is not a meal, but the sharing of a perfect, quiet moment. You have brought me here. That is the true gift. It was a brilliant, graceful checkmate. Poseidon, defeated not by failure, but by a lack of a stage for it, accepted the compliment. They floated in silence. He had never felt further from mastering the art of food. A lesser-known fact, referenced in a few hymns to Amphitrite found on Cyprius shards, is that she was later worshipped by some coastal wives as a Phaedria, the she who diverts. Women would make small offerings to her before big family feasts, praying for their husbands to be distracted by a sudden need to fix the roof or argue politics in the agora, thus keeping them out of the kitchen. Historians still debate whether the profound, enduring peace of the deep-sea abyssal plain is a natural phenomenon or a lingering, divine quiet imposed by Amphitrite's sigh of relief that her husband's kitchen is finally, truly, far away. But the reprieve was temporary. Poseidon's culinary ambition, though thwarted, was not extinguished. It merely shifted focus. If he couldn't reliably cook for others, perhaps he could create a creature so inherently delicious, so perfectly suited to his chew-ball methods, that it would cook itself in homage to him. His gaze fell upon the dolphins, his playful, intelligent, sacred messengers. They were beloved, fast and sleek. Surely, he thought, their flesh must be the ultimate delicacy. It was a thought that would cross a line, invoking not just failure, but sacrilege, and leading to one of the most enduring and peculiar dietary taboos in the ancient world. But for now, feel the immense, soothing pressure of that silent expanse. The absence of sound, of fuss, the intelligent, gentle essence of the creature translated into a flavor that was paradoxically bland, yet profoundly unsettling, a taste that carried the psychic echo of betrayed trust. It was, by all accounts, the worst thing he had ever made, not just inedible, but morally foul. He took one bite, and for the first time in his immortal existence, Poseidon felt not anger, but a deep, chilling wave of shame. It wasn't about the failure of technique this time. It was about the violation of something sacred. He had taken a symbol of grace and friendship and reduced it to a charred, tasteless mistake. The horror of it didn't come from the palate, but from the soul he wasn't supposed to have. In that moment of visceral disgust, his shame curdled instantly into a defensive, world-altering decree. He could not admit his error. Instead, he would forbid it for everyone forever. He rose, his voice not a boom, but a low, cold vibration that traveled through every current, every drop of salt water on the planet. Hear this, the vibration pulsed. This creature is my herald. Its flesh is now a curse. Any mortal who tastes of it shall be afflicted with a storm of misfortune. The sea will forget their face. Their nets will find only rot, their ships only dead calms or impossible squalls. The favor of the earth shaker will be forever stripped from them in their line. And thus, one of the most widespread and enduring taboos of the ancient Mediterranean world was born, the absolute prohibition against eating dolphin meat. It wasn't presented as a mark of respect for the dolphin's intelligence, but as a divine sanction born from a god's own failed dinner. Mortals, of course, assumed the taboo was because the dolphins were sacred, which they were. But the ferocity of the curse, the specific, nautical nature of the bad luck, hinted at a more personal grievance. It was less, "This is holy," and more, "I ruined this, and if you try to do better, I will end you." A lesser-known fact, recorded by a few skeptical historians from Miletus, is that in the decades following the decree, there were sporadic, hushed reports from the most desperate of sailors shipwrecked on barren islands. They claimed that in starvation, they had eaten dolphin meat that washed ashore and had experienced not storms, but a profound, lingering sadness and a recurring nightmare of a confused, cheerful whistle turning into a scream of betrayal. The curse was perhaps less supernatural and more psychological, a guilt so potent from the god who projected it that it infected the very act. Marine archaeologists and historians still debate the origin of this near-universal taboo. Some argue it's practical. Dolphins were useful for finding fish shoals. But the mythological severity of Poseidon's curse suggests a deeper, more personal source of pique, a god forever punishing the world for a mistake he could not stomach himself. The incident left Poseidon quieter, darker. He avoided his dolphins for a century. His culinary ambition, once a loud, brash nuisance, was now a wounded, sullen thing. He felt, for the first time, that the domain of food was not just elusive, but somehow cursed for him. He began to look not forward for new techniques, but backward to figures even more ancient and primal than himself. If the current pantheon, his wife, and even his sacred animals offered no answers, perhaps the old ones, the titans buried beneath the world, held some forgotten secret. It was a desperate, foolish thought. Consulting the titans was forbidden, dangerous. But a god nursing a wounded ego and a mouth that still tasted of his own profound failure is capable of very stupid things. His journey would take him down to the one place even Olympians feared to tread, the dank, hopeless prison of Tartarus, where his culinary questions would be met not with answers, but with a chorus of immortal, digestive complaint. But for now, feel the quiet of that empty lagoon, the absence of a playful whistle, the lingering, ashy taste of a mistake that became a law, the deep, cold weight of a prohibition settling over the ancient world, as heavy and silent as stone sinking into the deep. Let that stillness surround you, a taboo so complete it needs no enforcement, only the memory of a god's shame. Tartarus wasn't just a place. It was an ontological wound beneath the world, a pit of pure, distilled anti-creation where the defeated titans languished. The air, what passed for air, was a stagnant brew of primordial musk, the dust of shattered thrones, and the flat, metallic scent of eternity without hope. It was the last place in the cosmos one would seek culinary advice, which is precisely why Poseidon went. His logic, in its own twisted way, had a certain symmetry. The Titans were the old gods, the ones who ruled before recipes, before hearths, before the very concept of a shared meal. They represented a time of raw, unconsumed power. Surely, he reasoned, they held the original, uncorrupted secret of essence, of turning the raw stuff of the world into nourishment without all the fussy middle steps that kept tripping him up. He descended through layers of deepening gloom, past the prison of the Cyclopes, his tridents' faint glow the only light in the absolute dark. He found them not in chains, but in a state of dissipated ennui, sprawled across the cold, featureless plain like forgotten mountains. Cronus, his own father, was a vast, gray shape, listlessly chewing on a phantom memory of ambrosia. The others, Hyperion, Iapetus, Ceus, were little more than murmuring geological formations. Poseidon's arrival stirred them. A few ancient, starless eyes opened, focusing with slow, grinding recognition. Grandson of chaos, Cronus's voice was the sound of continental plates shifting under immense weight. Or is it son? The family tree is so tedious. What brings the new regime's water-bearer to the dregs? Poseidon, uncharacteristically, got straight to the point. I seek knowledge, the old knowledge, of consumption, of transformation. A low, rumbling laugh moved through the Titans. It was the sound of a landslide in slow motion. Transformation, hissed Themis, her form like a cliff of dark crystal. We were transformed into this. What knowledge could we offer? The knowledge before the forge, before the oven. Poseidon insisted, a hint of his old impatience returning. How did you consume? How did you turn the world's flesh into your strength? The Titans were silent for a long, aching moment. Then Mnemosyne, Titaness of memory, spoke, her voice like pages turning in a library of ash. We did not cook, little wave maker. We absorbed. We inhaled the vapors of creation. We drank from the rivers of raw potential. We were one with the act of eating, not separate from it. There was no preparation. There was only will. This was exactly what Poseidon wanted to hear. A process without process. Well, made manifest. Show me, he commanded. The Titans, bored out of their eternal minds, and sensing a chance for a petty revenge on the upstart Olympian order, obliged. They didn't have food, but they had the essence of things. Cronus exhaled in a shimmering, volatile gas. The very concept of hunger given form coalesced before Poseidon. Hyperion focused a beam of light, so pure it was the idea of heat before fire was invented. Iapetus offered a handful of Tartarian dust that was the primal matter of salt. Combine them, Cronus intoned, with a malice so old it had grown moss. With your will, as it was in the beginning. Poseidon, thrilled, gathered the elements. He focused his divine will not on cooking, but on the Titan-like act of primal assimilation. He tried to force the concept hunger, the idea heat, and the proto-salt to merge into an edible truth. It did not create food. It created a localized, ontological crisis. The space before him warped, screaming silently. The meal became a voracious, conceptual vacuum that briefly started consuming the very light and sound around it before collapsing in on itself with a pathetic pop. The backlash, however, was physical. A wave of nausea, not of the stomach but of the soul, blasted outwards. It was the sickness of pre-creation, the gut churn of chaos. The Titans, who had nothing left in their stomachs, collectively experienced a ghostly, sympathetic retching. Cronus groaned. Ugh, that tasted of your effort, of your striving. Disgusting. We haven't felt this ill since we were force-fed that underworld pomegranate paste. Leave, little god. You have poisoned our stagnation. A little-known fact from a near-illegible Orphic hymn fragment buried in the Vatican archives suggests that this incident is the true source of the air of ancient misery said to cling to Tartarus. It wasn't just the imprisonment. It was a divine, psychic case of food poisoning inflicted by Poseidon's experiment, a malaise that became part of the fabric of the place. Historians and philosophers of religion still debate whether the Titanomachy, the war between gods and titans, was truly fought over cosmic power, or if the initial rift began with a much pettier grievance, like a disastrous shared meal where someone, possibly a young, enthusiastic Poseidon, tried to improve the primordial ambrosia and ruined it for everyone. Poseidon fled Tartarus, the ghosts of Titan wretches echoing in his ears. He was now 0 for 3. Mortals, family, and ancient primordials all repulsed by his culinary efforts. He was running out of audiences. As he ascended back toward the lightless sea, a new, fragrant scent cut through the Tartarian funk, the rich, fermented, unmistakable aroma of wine. It led him not to the depths, but to a sun-drenched island where vines grew wild and laughter bubbled up from the earth itself. Dionysus had been watching the whole pathetic saga, and the god of wine and ecstasy had decided to intervene. Not to teach, but to provide a solution so elegantly simple it was brilliant. If you can't fix the meal, Just make everything that comes after the meal so good, no one remembers what they ate. It was time for a divine intervention of the liquid variety. But for now, feel the profound, empty nausea of that failed primordial meal. The hollow, gut-deep discomfort that comes from consuming not poison, but the very idea of failure itself. Let it fade, replaced by the distant, promising murmur of a stream that flows not with water, but with dark, sweet, forgetful wine. Dionysus found him first. The god of the sea was adrift, literally and metaphorically, in a cold, dark current far from his palace, surrounded by a cloud of disgruntled shrimp that seemed to be giving him a wide berth. The scent of wine arrived not as a smell, but as a sudden, vivid memory of a perfect summer afternoon. Sun on your skin, the buzz of cicadas, the promise of laughter. Then the god himself was there, leaning against a coral arch that hadn't been there a moment before, a golden kylix, a shallow drinking cup, in his hand, perpetually full. "Uncle," Dionysus said, his voice a warm, amused baritone that held the edge of a revel, just getting started. "You look like a man who's been trying to swallow his own trident. Cool me. Float. Drink." Poseidon glowered. "I do not require libations. I require mastery." "Do you?" Dionysus took a slow sip, his eyes twinkling with a knowledge far older than his youthful form suggested. "Mastery is such a stern taskmaster. Look at your brother, Zeus, mastering thunderbolts and marital indiscretions. It's exhausting. Look at Hephaestus, mastering fire and anvil. He's perpetually sooty and stressed. I propose an alternative path. Enhancement." He swam closer, a leopard skin draped over one shoulder, grapevines tangling in his dark hair. "You're approaching this like a general laying siege to a kitchen. You bring your cataclysms, your earth-shaking will. But a kitchen, uncle, is not a fortress to be stormed. It is a symposium, a gathering of elements. And every good symposium needs not just food, but the proper drink to elevate it, to make the conversation flow, to soften the edges of any mishaps." He offered the kylix. The wine within was the color of a deep purple twilight, and it swirled with its own lazy current. Reluctantly, Poseidon took it. He drank. It was not like mortal wine. It was the essence of fermentation itself. The release of pressure, the transformation of simple sugar into complex joy, the gentle erasure of sharp corners. It filled him not with heat, but with a profound, liquid warmth that started in his core and radiated outward, momentarily dissolving the knot of frustration he'd carried since Tartarus. "You see," Dionysus smiled, "you've been trying to create the perfect experience with your main course. A futile, heroic effort. I propose you curate it. Provide the liquid context in which all meals, regardless of their inherent qualities, can be enjoyed, or at least forgotten." It was a revelation, not a cooking lesson, but a culinary bypass. Poseidon's mind, more accustomed to brute force, began to awkwardly navigate this new, subtle strategy. He couldn't make good food, but he could, perhaps, provide the ultimate accompaniment that would make his food palatable. Dionysus, the ultimate party planner, saw the spark of understanding. "We'll start small. A simple offering. The next time you feel the urge to prepare something, you'll pair it with a wine I shall craft for you. A wine so profound, so layered with the taste of oceanic depths and sunset over the vineyards of Naxos, that whoever drinks it will be transported. The food becomes a mere footnote, a texture to accompany the journey of the wine." And so, the first divine wine pairing was born. Poseidon, newly hopeful, returned to his palace and, with grim determination, created what can only be described as a seafood tranche that had the consistency of wet sand and the color of a bruise. But beside it, he poured the wine Dionysus had given him, a wine that smelled of salt air, pearlescent oyster shells, and the sweet, dark grapes of a sheltered island. He served it to a terrified group of minor sea gods summoned for the occasion. They drank the wine first, as instructed, their eyes glazed over with delight. They were tasting the myth of the sea itself, the romance of it, the mystery. When they hesitantly nibbled the tranche, their senses, softened and redirected by the wine, registered it not as a catastrophe, but as an interesting textural contrast, a bold, briny accent to the symphony in their glasses. They left not nauseated, but pleasantly foggy, praising the unforgettable experience. Poseidon was elated. He hadn't cooked a good meal. He had orchestrated a successful distraction. It was a hack, a divine cheat code. From that day forward, no offering to Poseidon was considered complete without a libation of the finest, strongest wine available. It wasn't just worship, it was a practical necessity. Mortals pouring wine into the sea weren't just honoring the god. They were preemptively anesthetizing his culinary spirit, hoping he'd be too pleasantly buzzed to take a personal interest in their next fishing haul. A lesser-known fact, found in the records of ancient symposia, is that the tradition of serving the strongest wine after the meal, the deipnon followed by the symposium, might have roots in this very myth. It was a cultural memory. Eat the potentially dangerous food first, while sober, then use the wine to wash away the memory and inspire the conversation that truly mattered. Historians of viticulture still debate whether certain grape varietals known for their salty, mineral notes were specifically cultivated as tributes to Poseidon, designed to complement his domain and, by extension, excuse his hypothetical cooking. Emboldened by this semi-success, Poseidon fell into a new trap. He now believed the problem was one of venue. His palace kitchen was tainted by past failure. The sea floor was impractical. He needed a dedicated, state-of-the-art culinary workshop, one that utilized his domain's unique properties. He would build the ultimate underwater kitchen, a place where the pressure cooked, the vents seared, and the creatures themselves served as staff. It was his most ambitious project yet, a masterpiece of misapplied, divine engineering that would give us whirlpools and the fearsome reputation of the deep. But for now, savor the warm, drowsy haze of that first perfect wine pairing. The way a problem can seem smaller, softer, viewed through the gentle lens of a golden cup. The world blurring at the edges, not from sleep, but from a contented, distracted forgetfulness. The idea was, in his mind, architectural genius. If fire was his antagonist and water his medium, then he would design a kitchen that turned water's properties, pressure, cold, geothermal heat, into tools. He would build it not in the civilized shallows, but in the true deep, in a trench so profound even the light gave up. This would be his magnum opus, a place where his will could finally harmonize with culinary art. He called it the Benthal Gastrotorium. He began with the foundation, using a subdued earthquake to sculpt a vast, sunken amphitheater of black basalt. For his oven, he didn't want a simple vent. He wanted a calibrated, multi-vent system. He plunged his trident into a weak spot in the crust, aiming to create a gentle, steady upwelling of heat. He misjudged, catastrophically. The resulting rupture wasn't a gentle cooktop. It was a raging, superheated geyser that vomited minerals and scalding water, creating a violent, churning column. This, according to some oceanographers who study hydrothermal vent formation, is the mythical origin of the first permanent whirlpool, Charybdis's less famous, deeper cousin. It wasn't a navigational hazard. It was a faulty divine stove. Undeterred, he moved on to refrigeration. He summoned the spirits of the abyssal plane to pull a parcel of water from the Antarctic circumpolar current and hold it in a chilled basalt chamber. He succeeded, but the chamber's insulation was poor. The intense cold leaked, creating a deadly, localized current that instantly paralyzed any warm-blooded creature that swam near. The kitchen's walk-in freezer was a death trap. His crowning folly was staffing. He decided automation was key. He would not rely on judgmental nereids or nervous dolphins. He captured a school of giant Pacific octopuses, creatures of immense intelligence and dexterity. Using a combination of hypnotic whale song and threats of tectonic violence, he attempted to train them as sous chefs. He envisioned them tenderizing meat with rhythmic tentacle massages, using their suction cups to precisely plate delicate roe, their color-changing skin indicating the temperature of the soups. The octopuses, beings of profound curiosity and stubborn independence, interpreted their roles differently. One, fascinated by the swirling whirlpool oven, began hurling rocks into it to watch them vortex. Another, mistaking the purpose of the cold room, began storing stolen treasures from shipwrecks there. A third, perhaps the most intelligent, simply figured out how to manipulate the barnacle-encrusted lock on its tank and escaped on the first night, leaving behind a cryptic arrangement of crab shells that spelled out, in a rudimentary pictogram, what historians believe translates to, "This is insane. I'm out." The Bentall gastrotorium became a chaotic, humming, dangerous monument to inefficiency. The heat vents caused unpredictable currents that blew ingredients everywhere. The cold sink created zones of fatal hypothermia. The octopuses, when not escaping or sabotaging, engaged in complex octopus politics that had nothing to do with food preparation. Poseidon's first test recipe, a pressure-seared abalone that was supposed to cook instantly in the deep's embrace, was instead sucked into the whirlpool, stripped from its shell, and plastered against the far wall as a sticky, unrecognizable paste. A lesser-known fact, referenced in a single line of a sailor's lament carved on a Phoenician oil jar, is that the strange, localized screaming currents and sudden temperature drops feared by deep-sea fishermen in certain zones were blamed on the Sea Lord's larder, a place where the rules of nature were bent for a terrible purpose. Oceanographers still debate the origin of certain anomalous deep-sea turbulence fields, with a fringe and highly poetic theory suggesting they're the lingering, dysfunctional energy signatures of a failed divine project. The final straw came when Poseidon, trying to use a controlled seismic pulse to tenderize a whalebone for stock, he claimed, accidentally triggered a minor fault line. The gastrotorium wasn't destroyed, but it was badly warped, its delicate, insane systems thrown into even greater disarray. A slow, mournful groan emanated from the twisted basalt, a sound that would later be mythologized as the groan of the deep, attributed to sea monsters or restless ghosts. It was, in fact, the sound of a god's dream buckling under its own impracticality. He stood in the ruin of his would-be masterpiece, the cold, inky water silent save for the eternal, mocking hiss of his broken oven whirlpool and the distant, clever clicking of a freed octopus celebrating its independence. For the first time, the scale of his failure felt absolute. It wasn't a lack of skill or understanding or even the right ingredients. It was a fundamental divorce between his nature and the art he wished to command. He was a god of monumental, singular acts, earthquakes, tidal waves, horse creation. Cooking was a symphony of tiny, precise, interdependent acts. He could only ever be a cacophony. Defeated, he abandoned the Bentall gastrotorium to the crushing dark. It likely still exists down there, a cursed, nonsensical ruin, home to blind, chemosynthetic crabs and very confused eels. Poseidon drifted upwards towards the twilight zone, where the faint light from above couldn't illuminate his failure. He was out of ideas, out of audiences, out of places to try. In this state of hollow resignation, he was approached by the last person in the cosmos he expected to seek out, his brother, Hades, Lord of the Dead, who had been watching the whole pathetic drama from below with a kind of detached, administrative interest. The god of the underworld had a proposal, not to teach, but to manage, to contain the problem. It was time for a cost-benefit analysis from the deity who understood eternal consequences better than anyone. But for now, sink into the profound, silent cold of that abandoned deep, the slow settling of silt over twisted basalt, the endless, rhythmic hiss of the futile whirlpool, a heartbeat for a failed dream. Let the immense, weighty darkness of the trench swallow all thought of effort, all ambition, leaving only a quiet, cold emptiness. The river Styx did not flow into the sea. It was a separate, solemn current that answered to a different, quieter god. Poseidon felt its chill as he crossed into the underworld, not as a supplicant, but as a weary tourist of his own failures. The air here wasn't damp like the sea, but dry and still as a tomb, which of course it was. The light was the gray of forgotten things. Hades awaited him not in his throne room, but in a Spartan administrative chamber, scrolls piled high with the tallies of the dead. He looked up, his dark eyes holding no judgment, only the deep, tired patience of an eternal bureaucrat. "Brother," Hades said, his voice the soft shuffle of ash settling. "My petitioners usually arrive by other means. To what do I owe the turbulence?" Poseidon, uncharacteristically subdued, didn't roar. He simply said, "It doesn't work." Hades set down his stylus. The tides, the cooking, a flicker of something that might have been understanding passed over Hades's impassive face. He had heard the complaints, the shades of sailors and fishermen, heroes and cooks, all had tales whispered in the asphodel meadows, tales of bizarre offerings, of meals that haunted the living more than any ghost. It was creating paperwork. Unsettled spirits with unfinished gustatory business were a minor but persistent administrative nuisance. "I see," Hades said. He steepled his fingers. "You have approached this as a problem of creation, of imposition. You have tried to impose your will upon the art. This is the logic of our nephew Zeus. It is not the logic of a kingdom that runs on accepted inevitability." He rose and gestured for Poseidon to follow. They walked through the silent fields where shades drifted like smoke. "Look at them," Hades said. "They do not hunger, not truly, but they remember hunger. They remember the pleasure of a simple meal, bread, oil, wine. The memory is enough. It is the idea of the thing that sustains the order here, not the thing itself." They reached a simple, black obsidian hearth, cold and unused. "This is Hestia's symbol down here," Hades said. "A symbol only. We do not cook. We do not need to. The effort is redundant. The lesson, brother, is not to master the craft, but to master the allocation of the craft, to delegate, to outsource." Poseidon frowned, the water in his beard dripping onto the dusty floor. "Delegate? To whom?" "The Nereids flee. The octopuses mutiny." "No," Hades said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not to servants. To the ingredients themselves. Or, better yet, to the concept. You are the god of the sea. Your domain is teeming with life that is, in its own existence, already perfect. Al plein poister, al gliserning shordine, al sweet prone. Their perfection is your work. By the time they reach a mortal fire, they have already been cooked by the very fact of being your creation. The mortal chef is merely applying the final, respectful accent. The credit remains with you. It was a masterclass in spin. Hades was not offering a solution to Poseidon's cooking. He was offering a theological and public relations strategy to circumvent it entirely. He was telling him to take credit for the raw material and blame the preparation on others. Poseidon's mind, so literal, so unsubtle, performed an awkward somersault. He misunderstood, but productively so. So, I should not cook. I should create more cooks. Hades closed his eyes for a brief second. That is one interpretation. More creatures, more life, each one a potential chef of its own kind. Poseidon's spirits were rising, mistaking managerial advice for a creative mandate. If you wish, Hades said, already turning back to his scrolls, his duty done. The problem, he hoped, would now be contained to the realm of the living, where it belonged. Just ensure they are self-sufficient. Poseidon left the underworld energized, but in a new, diffuse way. He wouldn't build a kitchen. He would populate one. He began a frenzied, bizarre period of bioengineering. He created the pistol shrimp, whose snapping claw could produce a cavitation bubble hot as the sun for a microsecond. A perfect, self-contained searing mechanism. He did not consider that the shrimp used it to stun prey, not to cook it. He bred a species of bioluminescent coral that pulsed with gentle heat, imagining it as a slow cooker for stews. It just attracted confused plankton. He saw the cuttlefish, with its mesmerizing color changes, and thought, a living mood light for the dining experience. He didn't fathom its use for camouflage and communication. He was designing an ecosystem based on a kitchen's needs, completely ignoring the actual lives of the creatures. The sea became slightly weirder, slightly more full of niche, hyper-specialized animals that mortals would later find baffling and occasionally delicious, never knowing they were the result of a god's misguided attempt to franchise his culinary failures. A lesser-known fact, posited by a Hellenistic natural philosopher named Callimachus, was that the incredible biodiversity of the Mediterranean, compared to other seas, might be the result of this culinary radiation event, a burst of divine tinkering aimed at solving a dinner problem, resulting in an explosion of strange new forms that then found their own ways to exist outside of his intent. Marine biologists still debate the drivers of certain evolutionary peculiarities, with the Poseidon theory remaining, of course, firmly in the realm of charming myth. But the core of Hades's message, in its distorted way, finally seeped in. Poseidon slowly stopped trying to do the cooking. He began to simply provide, lavishly, excessively. He would cause a miraculous bounty of fish to flood a harbor, or guide a fisherman to a hidden bed of colossal scallops. The mortals would receive this as a divine gift, cook it with their own hard-won skills, and offer the first, best portion back to him in thanks. He would receive the smoke, the idea of the perfectly cooked meal, without having lifted a finger except to provide the raw, glorious ingredient. It was finally a system that worked. He got the praise, they did the work. It was the ultimate delegation. And from this realization, a strange and lasting legacy began to form, not in the kitchen, but in the culture of the shore. It was a legacy that would elevate simplicity to a virtue and make the untouched, pristine sea creature the ultimate object of culinary desire. But that is a story for the wakeful world. For now, feel the dry, final dust of the underworld giving way to the cool, rising pressure of the deep. The frantic, creative energy dissipating, replaced by a slower, more passive rhythm. The god's restless trident finally stilling, not in mastery, but in resigned, fruitful provision. The legacy of Poseidon's culinary catastrophe is not written in cookbooks, but in the very soul of seaside culture. Walk along any ancient Greek shore, at the smoky stall of a fisherman grilling his catch over vinewood coals, and you are witnessing the direct, mortal reaction to a god who couldn't be trusted with a soup spoon. The philosophy that emerged was one of defensive simplicity, a culinary minimalism born of respect and fear. Think about it. When your patron deity is a being who might, if inspired, turn a perfectly good tuna into a sentient foam or a geological event, you develop a deep reverence for the ingredient as it is. You handle it with care. You interfere as little as possible. You seek to showcase the god's creation, not to overshadow it with your own hubris. The result was a cuisine that to this day defines the Mediterranean. Grilled fish, drizzled with a little olive oil and lemon. Octopus, tenderized by pounding against rocks, then simply charred. Sea urchins, cracked open and eaten raw from the shell. Oysters, consumed with nothing but a drop of brine and the taste of the cold sea. Every one of these dishes is a quiet, elegant rebuttal to Poseidon's methods. They whisper, "Sea Lord of the Seas, this is enough. What you gave us is perfect. We will not ruin it with complex sauces or cataclysmic cooking techniques. We will just let it be." This became the unspoken covenant. Mortals would take the incredible bounty Poseidon provided when he was calm, and they would prepare it with a reverence that bordered on superstition. The fewer steps, the better. The less transformation, the safer. Fire was used as a clarifying agent, not a tool of alchemy. A grill was a purifying altar, not a laboratory. The greatest compliment a coastal cook could receive was that their fish tasted of the sea. It meant they had successfully gotten out of the way of Poseidon's original and only successful contribution. This also explains the ancient Greek suspicion of elaborate, saucy, or heavily spiced seafood dishes. Those were the domain of inlanders, of people who felt they had to compensate for their ingredients, or worse, of foreign cultures foolish enough to think they could improve upon the sea's gifts. To an Athenian, the idea of drowning a fresh-caught red mullet in a rich, reduction-based sauce wouldn't just be gauche, it would be impious. It was an invitation for disaster. It was playing with culinary fire in the literal domain of a water god, and everyone knew how that ended. A lesser-known fact, found in the personal notes of Archestratus, a 4th century BCE food writer from Gela, is his firm advice to never let a Syracusan chef boil your lobster. His reasoning was not that Syracusans were bad cooks, but that their tendency toward elaborate preparations involving cheese and herbs was an affront to Poseidonios, the pleasant, and likely to result in a sudden squall on the voyage home. He was only half joking. The link between culinary hubris and nautical misfortune was culturally ingrained. Historians of food still debate the origin of the Blue Zone diets, the legendary healthfulness of the Mediterranean diet. Was it mere geography and climate? Or was it, at least in part, a cultural adaptation to a divine edict? Don't mess with the seafood that enforced a diet of stunning, healthy simplicity for millennia? And what is sushi? The concept of eating pristine, raw fish with minimal accompaniment? While a world away from Greece, the philosophical through line is eerily similar. An ultimate respect for the unadulterated essence of the sea creature. One could whimsically argue that the Japanese, with their Shinto reverence for nature's purity, accidentally stumbled upon the only culinary protocol that would have truly pleased, or at least not angered, the god of the seas. He might not have understood the rice, but the glistening, untouched slice of tuna that he would recognize as something he provided, left blessedly alone. So Poseidon's final, unintended gift to humanity was not a recipe, but a restraint. A cultural break on culinary overcomplication when it came to the fruits of the sea. He shaped our plates not by example, but by terrible, divine counterexample. The fear of a Poseidon in the kitchen led to a celebration of the shore, the grill, the lemon wedge, and the trusting, brave act of eating something that still tasted profoundly of the water from which it came. His long, frustrating, cataclysmic journey had come to a strange, quiet end. He was not a chef. He was a provider. And in that acceptance, he found not mastery, but a different kind of peace, one that resonated with the deepest, oldest rhythms of his domain. This peace would finally lead him to discover his true, accidental masterpiece. Not a dish, but an atmosphere. Not a meal, but the perfect accompaniment to rest itself. But for now, savor the imagined taste of that simply grilled fish. The clean, smoky char. The flaky, moist flesh beneath. The absence of fuss. The profound, quiet gratitude for a thing left beautifully, deliciously alone. And so, we find him there, not in the kitchen, but on a solitary, moon-washed shore where his domain met the silent land. The frantic energy was gone. The need to prove, to conquer, to transform had bled out into the sea like a dispersed dye. He sat on a smooth, water-worn rock, his trident laid beside him, just another piece of driftwood in the silver light. He watched the waves, not as a commander assessing his troops, but as a listener finally hearing the music. He had tried to make the sea roar in a pot. He had tried to make its creatures dance on a plate. He had tried to force its essence into forms it rejected. And in his endless, clumsy trying, he had missed the entire point. The sea didn't need to be cooked. It was already complete. Its sounds, its rhythms, its endless, patient cycles, they were the only nourishment it was ever meant to give to the soul. A gentle wave slid up the sand, hissing softly as it retreated, the tiny bubbles popping like a whisper. Then another, and another, not in stormy crescendo, but in a slow, eternal in and out. The tide's breath. He focused on it, not with his will, but with a newfound, passive attention. He heard the million subtle variations within the constancy. The gurgle of water pulling through pebbles, the soft thump of a larger wave against a distant cliff, the nearly imperceptible sigh of wet sand settling. And a thought, quiet as a minnow's turn, surfaced in the vast ocean of his mind. This is it. This was the recipe he had been searching for all along. Not a recipe for sustenance, but for stillness. Not for the body, but for the mind adrift in the dark. The rhythmic, repetitive, predictable sound of the sea was the ultimate lullaby. It was the opposite of a dramatic, failed culinary creation. It was an uncreation, a gentle unraveling of the day's knots. A sound so vast and ancient it made all human worries and all divine culinary ambitions seem small, temporary, and mercifully unimportant. He didn't move. He simply attended. And as he did, he began, unconsciously, to smooth the edges of the sound, not changing it, but softening its occasional jaggedness, deepening its resonant bass tones, weaving the sharper cries of distant gulls into the fabric of the wash and retreat. He was not cooking. He was curating an experience of pure, sensory letting go. He realized this was his true culinary gift, not to the gods, who had their ambrosia, but to mortals, to you, lying in your bed, far from any shore, your mind churning with the day's leftover thoughts, the minor failures, the tiny irritations, the simmering anxieties. He could offer the antidote, not a meal, but a soundscape, a auditory blanket woven from the oldest loom on earth. He finally understood Hades' lesson about delegation. He didn't need to do the work of soothing. He just needed to provide the raw material in its most perfect, accessible form. The sound of the sea was his oyster, his tuna, his perfect scallop, and it required no cooking. It required only listening. His role was to ensure that its most sleep-inducing essence could be heard in a quiet room 1,000 miles inland. To let the rhythm of his peaceful, resigned domain become a gentle hammer that slowly, persistently, beat your thoughts into something smooth, quiet, and far away. So now, as you drift there in the dark, know that the god has stopped striving. He is just sitting on that rock, his stormy eyes closed, doing the only thing he's ever been truly good at, being the sea. Not the raging sea, but the endless, breathing, sighing sea. And he's sending that breath to you, not as a threat, or a test, or a failed experiment, but as a gift. The final, perfect dish from a god who never learned to cook. A plate of deep, blue silence, served on the shore of your own mind, with a side of eternal, rhythmic sound. Let in. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, as heavy and grounded as that water-smooth stone. Hear not just the sound, but the spaces between the sounds. The pullback, the gathering, the gentle, relentless return. Each wave is a thought being drawn out to sea, dissolving into the vast, dark, forgiving unknown. Another follows, and another, until the effort of holding thoughts at all seems unnecessary. They just come and go and are gone. The kitchen is closed. The experiments are over. The fire is out. Only the water remains, and the sound it makes as it touches the edge of the world and decides, again and again, to let go. His trident is just a shape in the gloom now, forgotten, its power to cleave and command rendered irrelevant by the greater power of simple presence. The moon continues its slow arc, painting a path of liquid silver on the water, a path that leads nowhere and everywhere, a visual echo of the sound that now fills the silence of your room. There is no more story to tell, no more myth to unravel. The epic has dwindled to a heartbeat. The grand quest for culinary mastery has resolved not in triumph, but in the profound peace of surrender. And in that surrender, he has found his purpose, not as a nourisher of bodies, but as a shepherd of sleep. The details of the day, the light on your ceiling, the texture of your blanket, the distant hum of the world outside, are all softening, losing their edges, being pulled into that gentle, sonic tide. The great god Poseidon, earth shaker, lord of horses, king of the deep, has become the keeper of the threshold between waking and dreaming. His realm is no longer just the salt-churned ocean, but this liminal space you float in now. He guards it with a quiet vigilance, ensuring the waves of sound are regular, predictable, a metronome for the slowing pulse of a universe winding down. There is no need to listen actively anymore. Let the sound pass through you. Let it become the blood in your veins, the breath in your lungs. The separation between you and the dark, between you and the sea, between the listener and the listened to, is dissolving like salt in warm water. You are not being rocked to sleep. You are returning to a state that sleep merely is, a vast, quiet, inner ocean, undisturbed by the storms of thought or the harsh light of consciousness. His final lesson, learned through millennia of glorious failure, is yours now. The deepest satisfaction, the most profound nourishment, often comes not from frantic creation, but from still acceptance. Not from forcing a transformation, but from allowing one. So allow this. Let the weight of his quiet reign, a reign over moonlit waves and hushed shores, press gently upon your eyelids. Let the rhythm of his resigned, contented existence be the only thing that remains. The night is deep, and the sea is forever. And you are almost home. The sound is everything now. The dark is soft. The world is far away. End of script. Sweet dreams.